Hello Year 10, it's Mr. Godman here. If you're watching this video, then you've probably already studied how support for the Nazis began to rise quickly after 1928, partly because of events outside the Nazis' control, like the Depression, but also because the Nazis had strengths of their own, such as Hitler's skills as a speaker. Your next step is to understand why Hitler was chosen as Chancellor in January 1933. And in this video, we're going to start that by looking at political developments in 1932. That's task 4.2 in your workbook. So if you need to, pause the video and get your workbook ready. You need this page for task 4.2. When you're ready, hit play again. So we're going to look first at the 1932 presidential election. Now, as you know, Hindenburg was previously elected as president in 1925, but according to the Weimar Constitution, the president had to be elected every 7 years. So, in 1932, it was time for the German people to elect a new president. In this new presidential election, there were 3 candidates. Hindenburg was persuaded to stand for election again, even though by this time he was very elderly and frail. But Hindenburg's supporters persuaded him to stand for re-election in the hope that Hindenburg could bring some kind of stability to the Weimar Republic. The other 2 candidates were from extreme radical parties, Hitler from the Nazi Party and also Thälmann, who was the Communist Party candidate for the presidency. Now, to win the presidential election, they needed to get 50% of the votes. And as you'll see when you read, in the first round, none of the candidates managed that. So the election gets repeated a second time. I want you to pause the video now and read about the presidential election. And while you're reading, I want you to note down what tactics did the Nazis use during the election. And you're going to try and find 3. When you're ready, hit play. So here's what I came up with. They flew Hitler around Germany to deliver speeches. Hitler's SA paraded through the streets, and the SA also disrupted communist rallies and fought with the communists in the streets. So after Hindenburg won another term as president, it was hoped that the Weimar Republic would become more stable again, but in actual fact, this was not to be. Now, as you know, Chancellor Brüning's position was already weak because he had struggled to deal with the Depression, and Brüning had become reliant on President Hindenburg to pass his laws using Article 48. We call that rule by decree. Now, in April 1932, Chancellor Brüning took 2 actions which lost him the support of the Reichstag and the support of Hindenburg. And having lost their support, he had to resign in May of 1932. What I want you to do now is to read this little section of your workbook, and I want you to note down in your own words, why did Brüning lose the support of Hindenburg and the landowners? And why did he lose the support of the Nazis and the other parties in the Reichstag? So here are my answers. Brüning lost the support of Hindenburg and the landowners because he was planning to force landowners to sell their land to the government in order to house the growing numbers of unemployed. And he lost the support of the other parties in the Reichstag because he tried to ban the SA and the SS. and the other parties were worried that he might ban their paramilitaries too. So at this point in our video, we're going to pause and think about this question. What evidence is there that democracy in Germany was in serious trouble by 1932? And I want you to try and suggest 3 or 4 ideas. I'm going to give you some clues. Look back at information box 4.1 and think about the following. Is there any evidence here that extreme parties were gaining support? Look at those election results again. Was Hindenburg a reliable, stable president? Was the situation on the streets calm and orderly? Was the government stable? In other words, was there a chancellor with a functioning coalition to support him? So next we're going to look at a source from this time period. And we're going to evaluate how useful this source is to a historian investigating the situation in Germany in 1932. First, let's start by reading the source. It's written by a British journalist in 1945. He was living in Germany in 1932. Each week there were new emergency decrees. Bruning's weary voice issued commands and was not obeyed. Berlin was in a state of civil war. Hate exploded out of nowhere. At street corners, in restaurants, cinemas, at midnight, in the middle of the afternoon. Knives were whipped out. Blows were dealt with spiked rings, chair legs, or leaded clubs. Bullets slashed the advertisements. In the middle of a crowded street, a young man would be attacked, thrashed, and left bleeding on the pavement. Bruning is weak, they said. What these swine need is a man with hair on his chest. People said that the Nazis would be in power by Christmas. When we're evaluating a source, the first thing we need to look at is the content. What useful content does this source have for us on the situation in Germany in 1932? Here are 3 really useful inferences from the source. I want you to pick a quote from the source to support each one. Pause the video, have a go at that, and then hit play. So here are my answers. For that first one, I've gone for this quote. It shows how violent the situation was in Germany by this point. For that second one, about Bruning's government losing authority, here's my quote. Bruning's weary voice issued commands and was not obeyed. And lastly, Germans wanted strong leadership. There's a lovely quote at the end of the source on that, where the journalist reports people complaining that Bruning was too weak and they want a man with hair on his chest, so a strong leader. The second step in evaluating how useful a source is to look at the provenance of the source. What do we know about the provenance of this source? Pause the video and write down everything you know about that provenance. So look, we know that it comes from a British journalist. It was written in 1945 and he lived in Germany at the time, so in 1932. Okay, final step. How does the provenance of the source make it useful to a historian investigating the situation in 1932? I want you to think about that question and try to make 2 or 3 positive points about the source. When you've had a go at that, hit play and I'll share my ideas with you. So I think this is an incredibly useful source. Firstly, it comes from someone who was actually there at the time, who saw the atmosphere and experienced the mood for himself. So his account seems reliable. There's no reason for us to doubt what he's describing. He saw it firsthand. And his account really fits with our own knowledge. When he's talking about Brüning's weakness, that fits very nicely with what we already know about Brüning losing the support of the Reichstag and finding it difficult to pass his laws. Here's another point we could make. As a journalist, this is an educated man, and a journalist has skills and experience at researching and interviewing people and reporting facts. So those quotes in the source are probably from interviews that he's carried out. So his description seems really credible, believable, reliable. Lastly, this is a British journalist. He's neither Nazi nor German. So actually, he's a neutral observer of the situation. And that makes him reliable. He's not biased in either direction. If you missed one of those ideas, perhaps you could pause the video now and jot down an idea that you didn't think of. And that brings us to the end of this task.